So I'm Lonnie Bates, and I'm one of the lock guys here in Utah. There's a few of us out there that like to pick locks and get together on lock sport nights every second Thursday at the Hacker Labs in Salt Lake, and I'm one of them. I go by Jimmy Longs on Twitter. That's been my handle for I don't know how long, quite a long time. For the last couple years, I've been working the SAINTCON Lockpicking village. I also do a couple of the villages around as well. And yeah, my day job, I work in information security. So I'm part of the blue team, and I dream about making life painful for red teams. That's at least lately. I've been picking locks since I've been a teenager, and I get that question quite a bit about how I got into it. And the truthful story was I had a bishop that was a locksmith, and I may have been a little bit of a rambunctious kid, but he was kind of telling us how locks work, and I was kind of drawn to that. And he ended up teaching me how the basics of how to pick locks. So the next few months, I was out on my dad's grinder, grinding hacksaw blades or whatever I could find that was thin enough to jam in the lock, and kind of started off from there. Fortunately, the internet had just picked up, and there's great guides like MIT's Lockpicking Guide and the Anarchist Cookbook that kind of went through it, and a few other things. Other things is I love 3D printing. I love CNC and electronics. Basically any type of gadget. I think there's a gadget gene that we inherited from my dad, and I definitely got that. So I love to design stuff, invent stuff, or just make stuff. And for some reason, I just really like to pick locks. I love the puzzle aspect of it. Once you figure out the basic strategies, it turns basically every doorknob or deadbolt or super nice lock that you see in odd places basically into a mechanical puzzle that you just got to figure out how the different types of pins respond, and I love the puzzle aspect of it. So I usually don't give talks at conferences because I really don't like to speak, but this last hacker camp, I was talking to Troy. We're at Jupiter, and we're all around, and we were pretty much being pretty chatty, if you know what I mean, at hacker camp. And I told him I had this great idea that I wanted to give a talk and give a live demonstration of picking live, and then go through it and see what actually was happening in slow motion. Just so you know, that's not this talk. that did not work out so well. It ended up being slow motion is really hard, and some of these lock picking techniques I wasn't actually good at. If you haven't been to Hacker Camp, they have it up near Strawberry. It's like one of the best CTFs. They put a lot of time into it. CompuNet is one of the main companies that goes through and sponsors it. And it's basically just a bunch of buddies hanging out there, hacking in the middle of the wilderness. It's great for families. Kids love it. They have a kid track. But anyway, okay. All right, so I had to start. This was actually the easy part for me. I went through and I designed the cutaway of what I wanted. I wanted the lock to be completely cut away as much as possible, so you could see exactly what was going in. And the cutaways that you sell or that you buy, they're really narrow, and you can't see exactly what's going on. And especially they limit a lot of light, what makes video kind of hard. So I went through, I designed it on Fusion 360, which is a super rad CAD and CAM program. Exported the GNC code. The only tools that I used for it was a 1/4-inch carbide end mill and a 332 carbide. And when you get that small, you're really gonna have to spin the spindle really quick. That's kind of the CNC side of things. So if we take a look at this, and I hope this works. Oh, there we go. So that's the CNC machine demonstrating it, and do I do audio-wise? That didn't come through right, did it? All right, we may not have audio on it. Let me see if I can figure that out real quick. Okay, we'll just go with that. So that's the G code. And that's what I actually see on the CNC machine. And then if we go ahead and take a look at this, this is a 1/4 inch mill with my extremely inefficient G code going through and making the cutaway. So that's what it looks like on the Tormac or the CNC machine. I only had to do a couple locks because of some of the things I did pretty much destroyed them. I needed to have makeup to make the video. So instead of doing the live effects or the live picking, I just went ahead and created the video. I made slow motion video, and we'll go through all the techniques. The first technique is a traditional single pin picking, and yeah, this is my most favorite way in the whole world to pick a lock. This is where you go through and manipulate each individual pin by itself, feeling if it's binding, if it's not binding, if you're at counter rotation, if you're getting clicks. This is what makes it for me it's what turns the lock into a puzzle. The main thing when you look into picking locks, the main strategy is to actually go through and find the binder. So on this left side, it's actually using a hook, and you're going to have to forgive me on my hands because I don't know if you've seen that contraption downstairs, but I built it, and I'm not exactly crafty with wood. So that's like after 3 weeks of trying to make a box and painting it black. That's what my hands look like. So what we're seeing here, so I'm on the 3rd pin. I'm lifting it until it picks. You can see it binding. And the 1st pin. And then you get rotation. So just to go back through that, you'll see me working from the front, pin 1, testing pin 2. You'll see that they're jiggly. Pin 5 there, you can see is binding. I picked it. You can actually hear it click when that occurs. Pin 4, pin 3 is binding now. Pin 2, and then pin 1. In this case, pin 1 was the last binder. Now, not every case will they like bind in order like that. And I think if you've picked the simple lock single pin method, that you'd be able to figure that out. So that's a hook. A lot of times, well, 95% of the time, I'll use a hook. This is doing the same exact thing, except with the diamond. And a lot of super tight keyways, it's hard to get it in there. So you can actually use a diamond the exact same way as a hook. Go through, set each individual pin, and there you go, you got it. So this absolutely is probably the most boring way to actually watch what's going on. And some of the more interesting things are the kinetic attacks. Everybody's probably seen these like desk toys where you bounce one and they bounce the other one on the opposite side. It's totally a kinetic thing that transfers the energy from one side to the other. And there's a lot of different strategies or techniques in lockpicking that allow you to basically do the same thing. What you're looking at is separating the key pins, which are the bottom pins, from the driver pins. So there's bump keys. Most people have seen those. Lockpick guns, snappers. You may not have heard those. They're similar to lockpick guns. And believe it or not, raking can actually be an extremely efficient attack. All right, so bum keys. They came out probably, I think like 9 or 10 years ago. We started seeing them. Honestly, I never had bumped a lock before. Part of me, it just didn't appeal to me. I mean, you could go through and just bounce all the pins. It wasn't really solving the metal, the metal or the puzzle portion. So it didn't appeal to me, and I figured that I would just be able to buy up bump keys and like hack it or whack it with the hammer and open the lock on video. And after a couple hours of smashing my fingers and trying to get it just right, I realized that there's a technique to it. And I had to kind of figure that out. So, like, I learned how to swim. I went to YouTube and kind of figured it out. On the left, well, on both of these, you can see that the bump keys are basically cut to the deepest part everywhere in the key. Then they're, so you have these little notches, which you can see on those left ones. And basically all they're doing is bumping the key pins, transferring the energies, and separating the key pins from the driver pins. So this is what it looks like going pretty quickly. So you can see them bounce and being separated. And yeah, so much material is actually cut away that you can see all the drivers actually fall into it. In fact, here, let me see. You can probably hear it. All right, so it's not the most entertaining, but it is a little more interesting when you slow it down. Just one interesting note is part of the not being a really good video guy. When you have springs in the actual chambers and you try to do anything, those springs push them down so quick that the camera speed on the iPhone, I used the iPhone to go ahead and take all this. It was not fast enough to catch anything. So what I did, I figured out if I just took the springs out, then I could go ahead and kind of get the gist of each of the attacks. All right, so the bump keys are a total kinetic attack. And if we look at some of the others, the lockpick guns are also kinetic attacks. You look at the old kind, and basically it's handheld. You pull the trigger, and it just bumps everything up. And you've probably seen the electric guns that do the exact same thing, but they're bumping everything up, separating them just like the cue balls. Or not the cue balls, but the pull balls, or else the key pins and the driver pins. They're both kinetic types of attacks. So here we are doing the handgun, and one's going to be in fast life, and one's going to be in slow life. All right, so that's basically, you're going to see exactly the same thing as a bump key, except for this next one, it's in slow motion. You'll be able to see it. The key thing on these are to you put the piece of metal on the lockpicking gun so that it touches the bottom of the key pins. If you can get it on the bottom of the key pins, to then go ahead and just smack all of them at exactly the same time, you're going to have your best bet. So we'll go ahead and play it in slow motion. It will go. All right, there was one. Is it going to do another one? Yeah. All right, and then if you keep them watching, it'll eventually set them, and then it That's how it works. The hard thing to get on these is actually the tensioning. You have to use a tension wrench at the same time to use these. If you put too much tension on it, the bumps, when it bumps the keys, they're not actually going to jump like they should be, and the keys pin is not going to be separated from the driver pin. If you don't put enough, the pins are just going to bounce around and nothing's going to keep set, and then you don't open the lock. So these are actually really cheap. And if we look at the guns, yeah, I mean, for $15 from China or something like that, or $40 elsewhere, you can go ahead and buy them. And people are pretty successful down on the tables. We have a couple of these that you can play with. You can go ahead and mount. It's going to be easier if you mount the locks up in a vise. Start with 2 or 3 pins, and then just try to keep that needle on the bottom of the pins, bounce them a few times. You're going to have to play with the tension. The tension is the more difficult part, and you should be pretty successful, especially if you start with 1 or 2 pins and work yourself up. If you run into security pins, these really isn't really the best method. And when I'm talking about security pins, the spool pins, the serrated pins and such. But honestly, they still work once in a while. All right, these are actually kind of cool. It's the same premise, and there's these old people on the internet that were locksmiths before, and they were building these little things. Basically, they're called snappers. They build them out of wire. They build them out of bicycle spokes. You stick it in the lock, you push down and release, and it does the same thing by snapping it up. In my experience, they're a lot easier to control and a lot easier to keep that bottom pin right on the bottom of the key pins, to be able to position it in the perfect position to bounce all the pins. The one on the left is just made out of a wire snake, and the one on the right is made out of bicycle spokes. I mean, that's the wire snake that it's made out of. And we'll have these in the Lockpicking Village tomorrow too, that you can go through and play with the snappers. I mean, for like 60 cents or so. Well, I guess if you count the whole wire snake, it's like $7 or $8, but you can make 1 million of them, and they're just as effective, if not more effective, than the hand picking guns. In fact, I can successfully use the left snapper right there on a Slade Everest, which you see in tons of different office buildings, within just a couple of clicks, and then use the same needle to go ahead and hit the passive side pin, and within a couple seconds that you can pop a pretty sophisticated office lock with the side pin. All right, so here we go with the video again. I'm gonna go ahead and put the headphone on my speaker because I don't know how to work audio. Just a sec. Oh, no. Yeah, so it does exactly the same thing as a gun. It's easier, it may just be a Lonnie thing, but it's easier for me to keep it in exactly the right place. So it makes it kind of fun. Here it goes in slow motion. And one thing to note is, if you like your lock, these type of kinetic attacks aren't the best things to do to them, because there's tiny brass pins in there, tiny brass pieces, and you're sticking sharp things that are beating the crap out of it, and it's a really good way to damage a lock. And you would have to use the last method on it, which the last method you'll understand after the lock is broke why you'd have to use it. So here goes a slow motion. And again. Maybe. There we go. All right, so you'd probably notice that so far most of Kinetic Attacks, the bump keys, the handpick guns, the snapper, they're all pretty much the same. Yeah, they're pretty much doing the same thing. So they're not too exciting. They're easy. Well, I thought bump keys were easy until I had to learn how to do it. It came out with bruised fingers. The other ones are, I guess there is a technique to everything, but they're definitely possible and pretty quick. All right, the other kinetic attack would be raking. So there's a lot of different types of raking out there, but there's also a lot of different types of techniques to it. And believe it or not, oscillating, scrubbing, and ripping, they're all completely different techniques, but they kind of accomplish the same thing. If you can picture oscillating, going back and forth really quick. If you picture scrubbing as just like on a scrub brush, you're just like scrubbing that thing, and rather than oscillating, it's not really as kinetic as oscillating. And then ripping is just sticking the pick in there and ripping it out, bumping those things. My most favorite picks for raking are the Bogatas. So the Bogatas are named after Bogata, Colombia by Raimundo, the inventor of them, and he named them after the mountains. And if you take a look at Tool's rendition of the Bogatas, you kind of see the natural peaks. I think what helps them the most would be kind of the natural curves that you see that kind of smooth up like a skateboard ramp, and I really they just naturally work really well. The other thing is that the original inventor, he hand filed all of them. He eventually worked with a few different manufacturers, Shear being the one that he went through and kind of got the shape down right. But still, I haven't found any manufactured Bogatas that I like more than the hand-filed Bogatas. What's kind of neat is these are pretty kind of relaxing to build. You don't have to sketch it out or draw it out. You cut an angle, a 45-degree angle in the front, and you use chainsaw files to kind of naturally go through and make the valleys. Then you flip it around, go through, and make the undercut on the other side. So they're extremely fun to make, and they're super effective. So you've probably seen this video of this handsome guy. That's me. This was the DEF CON contest a few years ago. So this is a pick that I used for. It was a Bogata. If you look on that left-hand side, that's the Southern Specialties jackknife. But what I did was I went through and I bought a pick blank. I went through and I cut it to about 110 inch or 110 hundredths of an inch strip, or 0.110 inches. And then I went through and I just created a Bogata out of it with hand files. Then you go ahead and polish it up, which is a super important part to make it super slick. So if you haven't watched this video, I've edited it so there's not some words in there. So, but you still may be able, you won't be able to make any of the words out, but there's some excitement. All right.
1, go. What? Holy.
All right. So I think it was the end time on it was 1.8 seconds or something. And we'll talk about how that went by a little bit. A lot of luck. There's more to it too. So the right keyway is what you're looking at. That's what type of lock it was. It was a quick set, a KW1 quick set. And if you look at it, there's a small edge that the designers put in for the wording on the right-hand side. It kind of sticks out. It's like they designed it so you knew exactly where to put your pick. It's like the perfect place. If you put a Bogata right in there, it's going to be hitting the bottom of the pins. So basically, you just pop, that's where you put it in. The designers were also nice enough to put a perfect place for the tension wrench. And that goes on the lower left portion of it. Just right on the, and it's completely makes it so you have a nice wide open space for your rake or your pick, your hook, or whatever method you're using. And then to go ahead and have a clear space that works really well for your tension wrench. This Keyway would be one of the ones that I wouldn't suggest putting on your house if you have it. The reason being is the majority of the locks with these are machined out of pot, or cast out of pot metal and then machined on the inside. The tolerances are super loose, and the super loose tolerances make them really easy to pick. So that's all of that combined made it possible to know, or well, to pop it that quick. Honestly, I got really lucky on 1.8 seconds. There were some really good, a lot of really good lock pickers in the contest as well, and they spent a lot of time trying to beat it. I think the closest they came was like 2-point-something seconds, or near 3 seconds. But anyway, that's a little bit ridiculous. I'm not super comfortable with having a lock that people can continuously pick within 2 or 3 seconds on your house, so I'd recommend having something there. The Llama, I searched around for pictures of loose tolerances and I couldn't picture anything, so I just put a Llama on there. All right, so I made this a couple years ago. This is kind of hilarious. Honestly, I didn't come up with this idea. I was on a couple of, I don't know if they were private, but they're kind of out of the sight of everyone else, lock mailing lists, and they were talking about this idea of having a electronic pick gun, but instead of going up and down like the snappers or the lockpick guns, that they oscillate in and out. And that kind of resonates with me because that's exactly what I do with the Bogata, is I oscillate in and out. I mean, if you take a look at the, here, we'll play it one more time, just because I like it.
One, go. What?
So I oscillated in and out basically twice, and that was enough to bump all 5 driver pins up above the shear line, away from the key pins, and to open the lock. Okay, so the kind of hidden mailing list that Christina runs, they were talking about going back and forth, and there's a mechanism that they were talking about using it. And then a couple of weeks later, my kids were carving pumpkins, and I noticed that the pumpkin guns did the exact same thing. So if you look on the pumpkin gun, there's a Bogata, which is kind of hilarious. So here it goes. So you can't really have a lock-picking talk without talking about Deviant. And Dennis, if you guys don't know Dennis, he's another one of the guys out there that's in the lock sport industry that just really help out. They put on a lot of the meets like Lockfest and LockCon and everything else like that. They're just super good guys. But here's a video of us. I brought it to Lockfest, and then this is Dennis using it just on a cheap master lock, number 3, I think.
All right, what do we got here?
All right, this is a pump rake.
What is it made of? What is this?
Okay, it's pumpkin cover with a Bogata rake.
Okay.
Let's see if this works.
All right, so that turned out pretty funny. You can buy those pumpkin guns for like $3 or $4 after Halloween. So I got like tons of them, and then you just 3D print a little adapter piece. I designed it. I never put it up. There's a few other people that have made them. They're pretty easy to design and just print. And there's the mechanism inside that kind of makes it go back and forth. If it was a more sophisticated gun, you could control the length of the oscillation and the speed, but I don't know. It was pretty hilarious and it worked pretty good. You could make a lot of people are putting city rakes on them, and well, a lot. I seen one guy. And it seemed to work pretty good. You can also put an S rake on there, but it's the same type of attack. All right, here's the video of the pump rake going. So this is a little bit more maybe interesting. It's not the same bumping, so here we go. All right, so I didn't use a tension wrench. That kind of just, I was trying to get the point across that the kinetic action between the key pins and the driver pins, and then it just kind of opened. Then we'll slow it down a little bit, and it almost seems that my bad editing skills were to extend this talk. They weren't, but here we go with the slow motion. All right, so that lasts another 25 seconds, but that's what's going on a lock. When I was raking that lock in Vegas, that's exactly what was going inside. I only had to do it twice, and I was lucky enough to hit them both right at the same time to pop all those driver pins above the shear line. But that's a whole exclamation or explanation of the whole thing. It's the same type of kinetic attack, just separating them, making that gap in there. All right, there's more raking as well. There's rocking, lifting, modulating, and they're less of a kinetic attack, and we'll go ahead and take a look at those guys as well. If you take a look at that picture, the reason I put it there was a popular pick that a lot of people use for these type of attacks is a city rake. And if you take a look at the cityscape, that's kind of where it got its name from. These type of attacks have always kind of reminded me of fuzzing programs, like security-wise. You're kind of just throwing everything at it and hoping that you get lucky. There's not really much thought. The hard part for the technique-wise is not too much tension, but enough to go ahead and catch the pins on their way down, and to try to make sure that you're just hitting the bottom of the pins. All right, so we have a couple more videos here. One is of the city rake, and we looked at that. The other is the S rake, and we have the S rake downstairs. And these will be videos of those guys. All right, so the sound's not really important on this one. So you can see the city rake and how it's a varying different heights. And this is considered a rocking. It's not really relying on kinetic energy. You're just basically rocking things back and forth until you get all the pins set. Given that I love single pin picking, every once in a while, I don't know if it's I just get unlucky with single pin picking, but I'll break out a rake when I get stuck on a lock and it'll just pop open. It's super irritating. All right, so that was a city rake. This is an S rake. I should pause it on. It looks like an S, so they named it like an S rake or a snake rake. But the same thing is gonna go ahead. The European guys like love these snake rakes over there for some reason. So basically they're kind of scrubbing it. It's a mix of scrubbing, it's a mix of rocking back and forth. And honestly, there is a little bit of technique because you can feel the pins get set. It's really hard to feel if the pins get overset. All right, and there it goes. That's basically what's happening when the newbies get to start rocking, kind of torturing the inside of the lock. That's what's going on there. There's one last time, and I mentioned like when you break a lock, there's one more kinetic attack that will fix it. And I Googled kinetic pitchers, and that's kind of what I got, and that kind of reminded me of this. All right. So it doesn't take the entire time to go through, I promise. What I thought about this was kind of interesting, and we'll just keep on watching it here. So yeah, I didn't actually have to get through the entire lock, which was kind of a relief because it was taking way longer than I thought it was. This was only the second time that I drilled the lock out, but it basically used a kinetic vibration in there. I mean, the whole purpose was to drill the shear line and let all the pins fall where they land, and then you open the lock. But it ended up being more of a kinetic attack too. You can see, like in this shot right there, pins 3, 4, and 5 were already set. Pin 2, that guy is completely overset. And if you're not familiar with comb picks, that's exactly what they do in cylinder 2. Is basically, it's a comb, think of it like a hair comb, but metal and kind of sharp. You just jam it in the keyway and overlift everything until all the pins, including the key pins, are outside of the plug, and then it'll turn. If the lock is pinned in a good way, it will not be vulnerable to that. But that's what happened with this. Is it was basically vibrating the entire lock until all the pins lined up right. Now, if the lock actually had springs in it, I really doubt this would happen unless there was a lot more vibration going through. But that was like kind of the intent was to go through and show that type of connect or attack. There's as references for this. There's Christina Palmer has a really good paper on raking attacks where she goes through and describes the techniques from oscillating to scrubbing in a really detailed, and that's located on our site in Elvencraft too. When I give these slides to Troy, I'll make sure that those are included. Let's see. The other thing would be is that her Bogatas that she's made or they've designed for tool. If you're interested in the Bogata for the oscillation type attacks to get used to that, those are the ones I would totally suggest if you don't want to make your own. And even if you do make your own, I would totally suggest those just so you kind of know what they should look like if you haven't had one. But that's what I've had today. It's a little bit short. I could only make the slow motion videos so long. But are there any questions? Yeah?
Why
Yeah.
do the pins set? I mean, is it because you have
That's a super good question, and the reason is because the locks aren't machined perfectly. If you take a look at the diameter and the shape of the pins, they're not going to be absolutely perfect. The same thing with the shape of the Bible, the holes that go inside the plug, and also the location of them are going to be different. So this is exactly why. In fact, we'll replay this again. That there's a binding order. In fact, in most locks, the binding order will be different. So on this one, pin 1's not binding, pin 2's not binding, 3, 4, not binding. In this case, pin 5 just happened to be the right size, either larger than all the pigs or all the other pins, or the hole diameter was smaller. I don't even know how much fractions of a thousandth of an inch, but in this case, the binding order is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The binding order can be completely different per lock. Fortunately, once you figure out the binding order, normally it doesn't change. However, if you got like an oval type pin, it can change. Yeah?
And how do you feel? What's the feel when it's up where it's supposed to be?
So that's another super good question. And because you can feel when the pins are set, that's what kind of turns it into a puzzle for all of these locks. In fact, I'll put the mic back down. I'll play this one as an example again. So it's testing pins 1 through 5. All right. So one thing a lot of people don't understand is when they're actually set, and then they test them again, and I hope I do that on this. Maybe that I don't. They're no longer, they're still springy. And the reason why is that the driver pin is no longer in the shear line, and the key pin will still push up on it a little bit. So instead of binding and feeling like you're pushing against something solid, it's going to have a little bit of give. So the strategy that people use is you work yourself through the lock looking for only the pin stacks that bind. So it's super simple. So that's another good question. This is a quick set keyway or a quick set lock. You'll notice that there's 6 cylinders in here. Like 95% of all the locks that you buy at Home Depot or whatever else, they'll have 6 holes in there, but they'll only be pinned for 5. I don't know why they exactly do that. I don't know if it's for saving on cost. There are minor differences in the key. There's these for Slage at least. The SC1 key is actually a little bit shorter than the SC4 key, and that's the main reason is if you want to pin a Slage lock, you have to have with all 6 pins, you have to have a little bit of a larger key blank. There's other types that have a lot more pins, 7 or 8 pins. Some of them get kind of long. Gel locks, for example, that tend to do that. But there's also, these are your standard pin and tumbler. You get into a lot of different types of locks, like dimple locks can have like 12 pins plus more pins. The further you dive into it, you can have pins inside of pins to make it even more complicated. You get into further, or like other security pins, you have pins that look like spools, like sewing spools. And you'll have serrated pins as well, which I didn't really go through this, but because it was kind of focusing on kinetic attacks. But yeah, any more questions? Yeah? So the one I picked with the Bogata, let's see. This one or what's this one? Okay, so I'm not too sure what part you want to see. Oh. I don't care. You can watch me pick again if you want, man. So this one? This one. The llama? Oh, that's a great idea. Okay, here we go. All right, this is where God intends you to put your pick. He put that there for us. It's one of the blessings we have in life. Oh, the tension wrench goes right here. So you can see the front pin right there. So you can have a pretty deep hook. You don't have to use the tiny hooks or anything else like that, and you can get underneath it, plenty of key space. Honestly, if I had to design a keyway for people, new people to pick, it would look like that. I mean, and this is on a huge amount of houses. But yeah, the one thing that will help you is when you're down at the Lockpick villages, take a look at the keyways. And this one is your best bet. Another interesting fact on the quick sets, if I can find a quick set key, you can tell them just by looking at the key ring. Do you see how it looks like a, here, where's my mouse? You see how it's a K? That means quick set or whatever, but that's why the key looks like that. So if you see those on a key ring, you'll know that's a crummy key. Anyway, any other questions? Yeah? We can totally give you recommendations. One of the reasons we don't have them this year was because I kind of bought out all the inventory from the suppliers to supply the lockpicking village, and then we didn't have, none of the suppliers had extra, well, they didn't have any more that we could go ahead and put kits together. So the ones that we have downstairs, those are the HPC, which I really like. They're all 20 thousandths of an inch. We could get into the details of 20, 25 thousandths, 30 thousandths, 15 thousandths, but it's all up to personal preference and what type of locks you're picking. But yeah, we can totally go through those. There's a lot of different manufacturers, from Peterson's to Sparrows to Southford, Southern Specialties. A lot of them have pros and minuses, and or cons and pluses or whatever, and you can have a complete talk just about that. But yeah, sorry that didn't answer your question, but we can help you. Anybody else, guys? All right, guys, we'll go ahead and call it. Don't hesitate to come jump in on the tables downstairs, and we'll have people down there to help. There's 2 or 3 of us that should be down there.